At Midway USA, we know the AR-15 is one of the most popular rifles in modern American history. Known for its modularity and widespread use, it's often considered essential to any gun collection. The essential things you need to run an AR-15 are usually always in stock during shortages, things like magazines and 5.56 ammo. Whether you're looking to buy a new AR-15 or buy parts for your modern sporting rifle, log on and for just about everything for the outdoors, shop MidwayUSA.com. The 1911 is one of the most iconic firearms in history. Designed by John Browning, the 1911 was the standard issue sidearm of the U.S. military from 1911 to 1985. While Colt produced the original, almost every major firearm company has produced its own version. It's wildly revered for its reliability, crisp trigger, and is still a favorite for all types of shooters. Whether you're looking to buy or build a 1911 and just about everything for guns, log on to MidwayUSA.com.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Harvesting Nature's Wild Fish Game Podcast. You got your host here, Justin Townsend, and I'm joined by one of our esteemed senior staff writers, Mr. Brandon Dale, today. Say hello.
What's up, everyone? How's it going?
It's always that initial awkward, like, hey everybody, after everybody talks.
Greetings. Yeah. I'm like, what do I say?
Yeah, Adam has just embraced it, just embrace the awkwardness. It's so we're gonna talk a little bit about kind of some introduction to fly fishing, some different aspects of fly fishing. We'll talk a little bit about urban fly fishing, and just kind of like go broad, and then we'll close it out with sort of some recipes and favorite things to do with freshwater fish and stuff like that. So I'm kind of building on this promise of foraging here in my urban setting. And so the other day we were on our way to breakfast, and we come across this tree with like these big giant pods on it. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. It looks really cool. Let's figure it out. So first thing I did was do the old Google photo search, because that's a legit way to start. So started there with a picture. All right. It identified it as a Kentucky coffee bean tree. Have you ever seen one of these, Brandon?
I have not.
So they have these big giant, they're probably like 2-inch by 6-inch, like flat. They look like beans, but they're flat and large, and they're kind of hard.
I have seen these, actually. Yes.
Yeah.
These are. Yep. I have seen these. Okay.
So then,
this is what they were called.
Then, yeah, I had no idea. I've seen them too beyond that, but this particular day we decided to stop and figure out what it was. And so I went to the internet, and first off, I was like, is this thing edible? Which in fact, I learned that in its raw form, it is not edible. It actually contains a toxin, but good news is the toxin is water soluble. So with that, I also found out that Mr. Alan Burgo himself, the forager chef, had a recipe, not only a recipe, but like the process and like how to process these coffee beans, we'll call them Kentucky coffee beans. And so, we gathered, I think, how many, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. And so it's, when you open them up, you like cut them down the middle. They've got these like large green beans in them. They look like edamame, just like they're probably about the size of a quarter. That's actually what you want to eat. You don't want to eat any of the other part of it. So there's like a pasty avocado substance in there. And somebody commented on his post and were like, hey, should I take that? And maybe I could use it like avocado. He's like, don't, you'll kill yourself. I was like, oh. So in order to get these coffee beans edible, what you have to do is you essentially like blanch them, drain them, blanch them, drain them. And I went a third time, blanch and drain, in order to get that toxin out. And then from there, you can just kind of eat them. They've got this interesting like a husk. It's like kind of an outer edge. It's a little rubbery, but once you cook it enough times, it gets not soft, but you can easily bite through it. It's not like chewy. Think about like undercooked pasta. You know how you get kind of like
Oh, perfectly al dente.
well, even less done than that. So that's where you kind of start off, and then if you get it to perfection, you're at like al dente, and so then you can like bite into it and get this like little bean in there. It's pretty good. So Alan's got a couple different of ways in which to do it. He does like a saltwater, like a brine, and soaks them for a couple days, and another one he did basically just kind of like what I thought of would be you think about like marinated olives. Is kind of how I approached it. So I took olive oil and grated garlic and some different herbs and spices and stuff, and I just put it in this oil. And then they've been sitting in my fridge for like 3 days now since I processed them. So we're gonna take them out and just enjoy them as kind of like hors d'oeuvres. Probably one night this week. My mom's coming into town on Thursday, so we'll probably try to stretch them until then and see if she likes them. So that was my urban foraging story, and then too. I don't know if you guys get Pawpaws, the fruit up that far north. Pawpaw season,
but I used to have them in Louisiana.
Yeah, Pawpaw season is full bloom here in like Virginia, Maryland right now, and so today I picked up 3 pounds of Pawpaws from a friend, and super excited. I think we're gonna do Pawpaw ice cream. We're gonna do a couple different things with that. The kids tried it for the first time. We're like in the car, and I'm like peeling it and eating it. And they're like, what are you doing? And I was like, just do it. Just pop the top of it, just squeeze it, spit out the seeds. Like, you're gonna enjoy it. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is like really good. So
yes,
they're now jazzed for some Pawpaw dishes. I was thinking, I've never seen anybody make like a Pawpaw flavored cocktail.
Oh, it'd be so good.
Yeah. So I think that's I'm gonna have to put it on the docket. But I'm thinking like, almost like kind of maybe like a pina colada type tiki drink, but with Pawpaws.
Oh yeah, so like a Pawpaw liqueur versus like a Pawpaw spirit, or like what are you thinking? Like use it as a sweetener for like.
Use it as a sweetener. And even to maybe like a blended drink. It's summer, right? Yeah. It's still hot out.
Yeah, true, honestly.
So it might be nice and refreshing. I think I'm going to play with it. But yeah, I've got some.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I'll post it up whenever it's done. And then let's see my latest. I smoked a nice Axis sirloin tip, which I just posted on Instagram a few minutes ago. Yesterday for like 4 or 5 hours, and came out kind of like roast beef, like lunch meat, just sliced up on sandwiches. So good. But man, oh man,
that's like one of my favorite ways to do whole mussels, and I think it's so underappreciated. Just like a little salt or like a long, a dry brine, and then some low slow smoke. Yeah,
I mean, just let it do its thing. You get good flavor from the outside from whatever seasoning you use, and the smoke, and then the inside you get a good natural flavor from the meat itself, which I think is great. And those two like complement each other really well. So I'm with you on that. Sometimes less is best.
Yeah. I pulled out my last piece of bear from like a year ago. A week from now, a year ago, I killed my first black bear, and I just finished off the last piece. And it was like a brisket, and it was like 2 weeks ago I pulled it out and did like a low and slow brisket, and had like amazing cross-fat marbling. Oh my gosh, made sandwiches. I was just like, I can't wait for bear season.
Yeah.
And it starts up like next week, so I'm pumped and
That's
ready.
Awesome. That's awesome. I think I'm gonna Maryland's got kind of a bear. It's a lottery, I think. A loose lottery, not like a Western lottery, but you buy a ticket for like $10, I think, and I don't know the process. I haven't looked at it. I was just looking at my initial sort of like planning of what licenses I was going to pick up, and I saw they had a bear lottery ticket, and I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. So
Pennsylvania is like a pretty solid bear population, and also the tag is like pretty much guaranteed.
That's awesome.
And New York, it comes with your license.
Nice. So
and it's $10 in Massachusetts. So
I still have my.
Work your way up north.
I know I'm going to come. I'm just hunting bears everywhere. Clay Newcomb, watch out. I just saw too. So I still have like my lifetime hunting and fishing license in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma just
Nice.
looped their bear tag into their lifetime license, which I thought was pretty cool. So like you get all your deer tags, I think you can get an antelope, you can get elk, and now you can get bear as well. So it's pretty cool. I think it's positive, right? It shows the population's growing. In places where there was populations were struggling for a while.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually just got an email. So, I'm originally from Louisiana.
Mhm.
Like, born in Jackson, Mississippi, but then like grew up in Louisiana. Had family there, and like it's really where I was like introduced to hunting and fishing. And we used to all the time, and like we go fishing for saltwater, and like take off and like basically the bottom of the boot, and all of the sort of like bear tins, all of the basically like fish gut piles, and also like trash bins that were bear proofed would always be knocked over by black bears. And like at the time, there was like a low population of black bears in Louisiana. This was like 10, 15 years ago, and they just opened the first season.
I saw that
coming year. I was like, yes, this is awesome in the parishes that I used to fish in. So I was like, wow, full circle. And like we would see bears all the time, like when we were in the marsh, and it was like it was rare, but it was like consistent enough to where I knew there were bears in Louisiana.
Mhm.
So it's cool to see that 10, 15 years later, now we've got a season coming up, which is going to be really cool.
That's awesome. Any updates from you? What have you been doing lately? We were talking a little bit earlier about kind of your action field day, but I think it's been about 2 months since we last talked. I think sometime in July we chatted last on the podcast. You and Quincy.
Yeah, it's been crazy, very very busy. I'm like full time back in clinic, so I've been in the hospital a lot, like working. But aside from that, I've also been fishing a bunch. It's like been peak like sort of guiding season for me, so I've been like taking a lot of people out on like carp in the park, fly fishing trips here in Central Park. Really just like showing people how to fly fish for carp, but then also how to catch these really large, very fun, very like the technically challenging fish in the middle of like Central Park, which has been a blast. And then actually today just opened up my like first hunt of 2024-25. So I was goose hunting and then some squirrel hunting, and wanted to work some fishing in there, but it was like just a little too much for the day. So tomorrow, some more fishing.
Tomorrow,
yeah, man, I'm like, full force getting ready for like dove, more geese, some squirrel this week, and then we have like an early deer season that starts off. So like in 2 weeks, I'll be doing some early deer and the bear as well over the course of next week. And I'm on full vacation mode, meaning full hunting fishing mode for like the next 2 weeks. So I'm very pumped after Thursday.
That's awesome. Congrats on that. Yeah, I think our early season archery season opens up, I think, next weekend here in Maryland.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I think I got to figure out. My daughter's birthday's this weekend, so probably won't be going out hunting. But
sorry, I'll be back.
Yeah, I'll try to figure something else out. But no, it's an exciting time of the year, man. And dove season kicked off like yesterday in a lot of parts of the country. I wrote. I don't know if you read it. You've been busy. I wrote a breakup letter with dove poppers and posted on the Harvesting Nature. It's very like comedic satire recipe or letter, sort of how through all these times it's really kind of been about the bacon. And instead of covering up dove with bacon and cream cheese, I want to just like embrace other dishes. So yeah, I'm swearing off poppers.
I'm gonna have to check that out because it's funny, like I had one of the only like places that you can dove hunt basically north of, I think the farthest place south, Pennsylvania has a dove season.
Okay.
But like New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, did I miss any states? I don't think so. Yeah, all don't have any sort of like dove season. So the only place in New England or like really north of New York is Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I started dove hunting here last year because I did a bunch in Louisiana. And man, I brought doves back to like a sort of pre-deer camp with some of my friends, and like everyone was like, now they're coming dove hunting like at the end of September. And it's funny, Quincy and I actually like met. That was our first hunt. I was like, hey, I found this field. It's loaded with doves. Let's go. And so it really is like, one of those things where I feel like I'm going to have to get away from the popper game because it's a great intro, but you're right. The food in and of itself, like the breast flavor is so good.
Yeah.
So like trying to showcase it in a different way would be really cool.
So people look at me crazy when I'm like, you gotta pluck them, man. Like it's tedious, it's time consuming, but yeah, pluck those little doves, man. I I think one of my favorite recipes I've done with like whole dove. It's up on the Harvest Nature website, but it's Peking dove, and so you sous vide them, so you don't dry them out. You sous vide them in like the Peking sauce, and then you finish them on the grill, and it's like it's so phenomenal. So
that sounds great because you get I was wondering how you get a crispy skin, and so you finish on the grill.
Finish on the grill. Yep.
Oh man, ideas! I might have to add a couple more dove trips to my next couple weeks. That sounds good.
Doves beware.
Yeah, on a mission. Geese first, though. More meat.
Yeah, I should say. Yeah, if you're talking about meat ratios, geese are going to yield more for sure.
Whether you're just looking to stay warm during a hunt or need maximum concealment, the clothing you wear can make or break a hunt. At MidwayUSA.com, we understand hunting clothing has come a long way with more meticulously crafted camo patterns, advanced scent control technologies, and weatherproof options to withstand the elements. Hunters have to wait until their favorite season, but shouldn't wait on gear, which is why Midway USA offers super fast shipping. When you're ready for your next system, log on to MidwayUSA.com.
The only shooting stick with one-handed trigger pull adjustments has a new way to keep you at the top of your game. The Trigger Stick Apex. Built for sturdy support that adapts to unforgiving terrain with easy adjustments to make your big shots. With our DuraSteady 3-piece carbon leg design and interchangeable rock-solid clamp, nothing tops the Apex. The Trigger Stick Apex, only from Primrose.
Let's see. All right. Well, let's change gears a little bit. Let's get into it. So, I guess I'll talk a little bit about how I kind of got into fly fishing, and I am by no means any sort of expert on fly fishing, so I'm just going to absorb a lot of your information. I think I only ever really knew what fly fishing was growing up, of like a river runs through it, seeing like nicely painted or photographed or written about articles of like, this very symbolic casting on this riverbank with mayflies dusting in the air. It's like sometimes sunrise or sunset, that type of very like spiritual connection to fly fishing. That's what I thought of growing up as a kid. And not a lot of people, there was fly fishing in Oklahoma, but not a lot of people fly fished in my like immediate circles. So we primarily just like, use casting reels or whatever in ponds and lakes and all that fun stuff, jug lines, trout lines, all those fun things. I think it was about in my early mid-20s. It was after college, and I was up in California and met my buddy AJ, who he and I still fish and hunt together to this day. And he took me, we went on a trip up to the Dakotas, and on the way back came through the western side of Wyoming and fished, I want to say the North Fork of the Shoshone, I think out of Cody, Wyoming. I think it was a long time ago, long time ago. I think 2010. So probably the first time I picked up a fly rod. I probably looked less poetic and more like I was swatting flies, but I caught a fish.
Dude, that's huge on your first outing.
Yeah. I caught a fish, and I caught a cutthroat trout, which was like my goal that I wanted to catch. So I was super pumped, and I was like, this is great. Since then, fly fish like the surf a bit on the West Coast. I've, fly fished. I got a little bit into Tenkara while I was in Colorado, just because it's easy to haul around in your pack. And that's kind of, here and there I've done it. I like to go places and try to fly fish, whether or not I catch any fish, but it's a lot of hiking and casting and maybe not a lot of catching, but it's still fun. It's been good. So yes, that's my experience. Very basic, but I'll let you, how did you get into fly fishing? How did you go from starting to now you're guiding? How did that transition happen?
Yeah, man. First off, I think that I love hearing your story. I feel like it's so relatable to a lot of people. And I think, quite similarly to me, even right. I grew up in Louisiana. I feel like in the South, fly fishing is now a thing, in the past 5 to 10 years. People are now like, oh my gosh, you can fly fish for redfish and garfish and carp and all these other things that are more common fish in the South. And I think that was definitely my experience growing up. My uncle was a semi-pro bass fisherman. And so he was really I grew up on the backside of an outboard, like casting, like, tech Carolina rigs with like bait casters and stuff on like competitions. And so like hardcore, like plastic worm, bass fishing, like crankbaits and spinner baits and all this stuff. But then basically I was like like a high adventure guide at this like Boy Scout camp called Swamp Base in Louisiana. It's like right outside it's in the Atchafalaya like river basin. And basically they wanted to teach some of like the participants, because people travel from like all over the country to like come down and basically kayak for like 10 to 12 days in the basin. And we were like sort of guiding people in the camping on islands and stuff. And they wanted to teach people how to fly fish. And I was like, oh, well, I've always wanted to learn how to fly fish, but I didn't think it was a thing. I thought I was like, I got to go to like Arkansas or like Montana or like someplace out west. Like we can't fly fish here. And they actually had a fly fishing guide who like basically they like the Boy Scout camp hired to sort of be like give all of the camp counselors and trek guides just an intro. And it was essentially like they were supposed to hire him for like an hour, and it was like 10 minutes of like, oh, like here's how you pick up the rod, and basically it was just horrible. And like they then equipped us with rods and were like, now go and teach people, and it was just flailing all the time. And so from that though, I was like, man, I don't quite get it. And every once in a while, like during the past couple of weeks after that first lesson, I would like pick up the rod and sort of like get a feel. And it's like one of those things where even now I tell clients like when you get a sensation of like the correct like fly cast, you realize that it's much more of like a timing and finesse thing than it is like actual muscle. And like once you feel that, you really do feel like the rod fully just like unload, and like that flick and sort of like sending of the line. There's like a literal energy in that transfers, and I think that like that sensation of like line shooting through the guides and like delivering a fly, because it's like your visual, you feel the end of your line stripping out after it's like gone all the way to your like full length of line out. It's electric. And I think that like after feeling that once or twice, I was like, I don't know how I did that, but I need to keep doing this.
Yep.
And I didn't even worry about catching fish at the time, because I was like, oh, if I want to catch fish, I'll just use my like conventional stuff, because I was like, I can catch fish anyway with conventional gear. And then like, so then basically this was like my junior year in high school, and like just kind of kept like picking up casual like fly. I could go to the park and stuff and like fly fish a little bit for like bluegill. But it wasn't really until I went to college, like my senior year, I like took a summer, and basically right before I went, my roommate and like best friend and I, like my best friend and like football locker like roommate, he was like not a fly fishing guy, not a hiker or whatever, but I was like, hey, I want to go to Yellowstone and backpack and fly fish. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah, let's like save up money and like do this like, high school road trip or whatever. And we went there for like 3 weeks, and it was amazing. We like fished. It was all blown out. We like got to Yellowstone and like tried to fish like all of the sort of like local like legendary streams like the Gallatin and like the Snake and all these other streams, and they were all blown out. And it was like we like backpacked for like 2 weeks, and I was like, oh, this is like terrible conditions. But it was a blast, and I really just loved it. And so since then, essentially like continued to do it in college, and like really kind of dedicated to like, I really want to figure this out. And by that point, like I had gone up to Arkansas and like fished the White River and the Little Red River and some of like the southern fisheries. Just like DIY on my own. And like I remember the first time where I really felt like, oh my gosh, I'm catching fish. It was just like woolly buggers, classic woolly buggers, stripping, and boom, oh my gosh, there's fish here, yes. And then I think when it really kind of like all came together was probably college, because I just kept doing it. And I guess like, yeah, I mean, literally in between classes, like I met one of my good friends who was eventually one of my really good fishing buddies in college, where we would like skip like our labs and be like, hey, we can do this lab remotely, or like finish it the night before and just like drop it off in the morning, and then literally like get out to like one of these rivers in Rhode Island that has like wild brook trout. And like it was just, we would do this so regularly, it was crazy. And then like we'd also go to some of the stock streams and like catch all these fish and then come back and like have a fish fry in our dorm. It was crazy. But it was just a blast. And like he was from Montana, and so also just equally obsessed with fly fishing. And like I think we really like leveled each other up in a lot of ways, because like I would bring like, oh, like this is good structure, we should fish like based on conventional, and then he had like some fly fishing experience, and so like just kind of continuing with that. It got to a point where like I have like one conventional rod here that I keep because it's like my uncle's, and like it's like special to me and for my family, and like it's what I grew up doing. But like I exclusively like fly fish now. Like if there's a fish, I'd much rather catch it on a fly, and I think it's because there's so much more like challenge associated with it, but also like it's just like a form of fishing that I think I really enjoy, because it requires you to sort of similar to like bass fishing. You got to know so much about how and why the fish is eating this artificial thing that's like tied with fur and hooks. And like when I started tying my flies, like that also sent me down the rabbit hole. Like I went to Alaska before med school here. That was like 6 years ago. Like DIY, I was like, look, I'm about to move to New York City. I want to take some time off after graduating college. And I went for 2 weeks to go fishing in Alaska for salmon because I was like, I want to catch salmon on the fly. And that was like brutal because the first 2 days I was like, oh my gosh, I can't buy a fish over here, even though they're like everywhere. But you know, I like yeah, that was my first time like hiring a guide, and like that was amazing. Like his name's Daniel D. Ray Outfitters in Anchorage, and fishes and guides the Kenai Peninsula, and like yeah, just learned so much from him. It was amazing, and then like really sort of opened my eyes also to like all of the skills and things that you pick up from like all of your fishing experiences can really like culminate into whatever you want to do. But I think for me is one of those things where like between like tying flies, thinking about like where and how you present your flies and how your actually like lures or flies look to fish. I really think I appreciated that like holistically because I had like such a pretty robust like fishing experience before even just exclusively fly fishing. And so now it's like I absolutely love it. And I think it's just one of those things where like I always have a fly rod with me. Like every vacation or time off I have, like thankfully my girlfriend is very, she loves the outdoors, loves being outside on water. And so it's really great because like we get to always like build in some river time, and like, you know, she does some tenkara fishing as well, which I also like have a couple tenkara rods and absolutely love for traveling. And I think it's just one of those things where it's just become like an integral part of like, you know, like our time together and also just like my life. Like I think like it's a really special thing because I think fly fishing always brings you to a space and a place that like is always beautiful, even if it's in the middle of Central Park. That you're like, oh, this is the middle of like an urban jungle that like is kind of crazy and chaotic, and there's people getting married and there's people like, you know, doing like some sort of dance circle thing to like, you know, the like mountains of like, you know, the Gallatin in Montana, or, you know, even like the Pulaski River upstate New York, where you're like battle around fishing for salmon or like steelhead. And I think it's like all of these different perspectives and places. I think it's really cool because like, you know, fly fishing I think just opens that door up for you because there are even like places that you literally couldn't fish with any other method aside from just fly. So I think it opens up a lot of water for an access perspective too. But yeah, I could like wax and wane about this like literally nonstop. I like love the sort of sport and field of fly fishing, and I think there's a huge component of it too where I think that like, you know, growing up and doing it, like I'll bring a fly rod back when I go home to Louisiana, and like all of my like family and stuff, we're gonna be like even my dad and my uncles are like, oh, you're bringing the fly rod out, and they've got like they're like shrimp buckets and like getting their spinning gear up, and I'm like, yeah, you're gonna outfish me, I know, but I just want to see that one fish come up and eat, and like with the fly that I chose to represent this like bait fish that's like around here now, and like in a way, and I think it's just like it's a really like intimate way to meet a fish like where they're at, and I think that's like a really cool thing that I think for me is like a big draw, and I think for other people too, it's like a cool thing to sort of like really get down to the nitty gritty of like how do I just make something that like once you take away scent, like fishing gets really difficult. That's why like bass anglers and people who use artificial lures, like all the kudos to them too. Like they're thinking about like vibration and like sound and also like the weight and size of different profiles and colors, and it's the same as flies, but I think when you add in the casting element, it's like another level of like, oh man, now I may have figured one of those things out, but I have another level of like, can I make the cast?
Yeah.
And so it's just a lot of fun ways to sort of like permeate. It's very creative, and I think ultimately too, like, you know, I'm waxing and waiting about all the things that I like that I think are difficult about it, but I think also it's just fun, like going to the pond and catching bluegill, seeing stuff come up on the top. I think the surface fishing is fly fishing. I think that like most people don't fly fish to fish subsurface. They fly fish because they want to see a fish eat something on the top. And that's like, who doesn't love that? If you fish, like anyone who fishes likes seeing fish come on the top.
Come
like,
up, the giant, the grab, jump out of the water. Like that's what you envision. Everybody sees.
Yeah, like man, that's the thing. That's what keeps people on the water. And I feel like, you know, you just get more of that, I think, with fly fishing generally. And I also think, I don't know, I think there is something pretty cool about like sort of being able to tie your own flies and like create in that process. Like you get to make your own like flies and sort of think about, you know, this didn't work, so let me change it up. So I don't know. I just think there are a lot of elements to it. I think also it's a solid community. I like the conservation minded element too. I feel like flying anglers are very much so like well, really like not to say other anglers aren't, but I do think that like the ethos of fly fishing, especially with like catch and release and stuff, I think do sort of put like an emphasis on like trying to like make the resource a little better than when you found it. And I keep fish all the time. Like I'm totally for keeping fish, especially stocked fish or whatever, and fish that are within healthy populations. I think some people in fly fishing can be really pretentious about it, which I do not like. But I think like having people who like can push back on that perspective about like the pretentious sort of like stuck up attitude of it is really important too, right? Because like you can still be a fly angler and a conservationist and keep fish, and that's totally fine. And so I think that's another reason why I fish a lot of urban areas and like guide in an urban environment too. So anyway, that was a long-winded answer to say, yeah, it's been a long journey.
Brandon really loves fly fishing.
Yeah. That's my monologue for the night. So I'm done. 3-word answers for the rest.
No, it's good, and you know, it really shows. Like, I think you tell a good story of your kind of evolution through fly fishing, and I think that's good to see. And you know, I think, you know, our focus of this episode is talking to folks who maybe want to see themselves on a sort of similar journey. So it's good to kind of like lay out the pathway of like how that developed for you, I think. But also too, I was thinking about this and sort of mentioning from like when you started and when I started, do you think that fly fishing now is more approachable than it was, say, like 10, 15 years ago?
Oh, dude, absolutely. I mean, I think of like the resources. Like I remember looking up like how to roll cast, and it would be like one video. It'd be like Orvis, Pete Kutzer, which is great. I love Orvis. I love Pete Kutzer. Great teaching. But it's like there was like usually 1 or 2 resources available online at the time. Mm-hmm. And like now it's like you have like thousands of like, you know, people who may not even have like guides licenses or be like formal educators or formal like casting instructors. But like just adding like so much like knowledge to the space, and like the social media I think is really great for that. Like a lot of times when I'm like teaching people like brand new beginners, like from like sort of in the park when I'm guiding or something, or even just like in like clinics that I'll do, I will honestly use a lot of like terminologies and things that I found that like I'll see in videos that like I watched whenever I was like, you know, just beginning casting, and like it's from like some dude who's like out on a park pond who was like, you know what, I watched all these videos, didn't help me, and like this is how you got to think about it. Flick a tomato off a stick. And I'm like, that is like the best description I've ever heard. And I'm like, that's exactly what you're doing. You're flicking a tomato off a stick. Like everything else is just complicated. And so I think that like, you know, to your point though, like the resources have evolved, I think, to become a lot more approachable for people. And I think a big part of that too is that like, I think fly fishing, like even when I started, I remember going to fly shops and people were looking at me like, you're fly fishing? And I think that element of it, right, the fact that like it used to be and still is in some places and in a lot of spaces like something that is like a little pretentious and like sort of gatekeepy. I think that's changing, and I think that's a really great thing that you have so many more people, like new types of folks, also just people who've never like fly fished, who maybe fished for other experiences, but also come from different backgrounds getting into fly fishing. I think that like there is a cultural shift that's happening that's making it more approachable and also welcoming for like anyone to get into it. Like I think the transition of like women coming into fly fishing in our like, you know, 5-10 years, amazing. Like right now there's like, I'd say not gender parity, but like we're much closer to that than like we were 5-10 years ago. And like now the next wave of that is really trying to get like, you know, more folks who didn't fish, more brown folks, more BIPOC folks into the same access of fly fishing education, and more people who live in urban cities. And so I think there's like a very large and strong tide of like that movement, which is really great, I think. And that is something that is changing, but it's slow. Like all change is slow, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think too, and I even think about, you know, just from the social media or media aspect of it as well, as like, you know, looking back and there being like intro videos, kind of like, here's how to do this, here's how to do that. And now, you know, I think I've been following like one of the guys, I think it's Wildfly Productions, I forget his name, but he fishes all over the country. Like his like evolution journey went from like, he was just, you know, a trout bum working in whatever state he was at, and now like he's just traveled the country fly fishing, and now he does like talks and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, I think some of that too, you know, just the broad expanse of just showing people, hey, like here's these really awesome adventures, but they don't have to be these grand verbose adventures. Like you can just go to your local river and just like pick up a fly rod and go at it and, you know, have fun. And I think as much as I'm in support of like the sort of catch and cook, I think from a like skill exploration adventure standpoint, I think, you know, the catch and release, you know, and conservation as well, catch and release certainly has its standpoint and place in fly fishing, I think, overall. And that opens up, I think, more appetite and more entry for people who just want to get into it as well, of like, all right, I don't, thinking through this whole process of like, I have to go to a place, I have to catch a fish, then I have to bring the fish home, and then I'm going to cook it. Like, that's a lot. Like, let's just start. Let's go to the place, catch a fish, let it go, and then maybe we'll go find another fish, and we'll catch that fish, and then we'll take it home. I think there's lots of different avenues, and I think another thing too is getting kids into it is going to shape it a lot. And I see a lot more youth fly fishing now than I did a few years ago. And I think it's good. My kids have shown interest in it, and we've done it as we've been out on adventures and stuff like that. But I think it's great because that's going to change the whole community as well, of like this whole youthful generation coming in and fishing. So
yeah,
cool.
I mean, the fact that we have like the USA like youth fly fishing team consistently ranks, like I think we ranked like top 5 in like the world fly fishing championships like this past year, but like consistently we'll rank like top 10. And it's like all youth teams trained out in Pennsylvania. It's like that's kind of nuts that they even have that. And it's like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like you'd have never been able to read a book or like hear something about that. And like it's just really cool to see like the next generation of like young anglers really like pushing the like sort of like the entire like sport like forward. I think it's really cool to see like the passion that all those kids have for it. So I think I definitely relate to that. And I think fishing is a great, like fly fishing specifically, great gateway to hunting. I think that like another reason why I really love fly fishing that I didn't really talk much about, but like it's the closest thing to hunting that you have, especially in the fact that like when you hunt, right, you can't hunt and go out and hunt without the intent to kill, right? And like in fly fishing, you don't have to kill the fish. It's really nice to be able to have that element of like looking, like really being keyed in, like making the determination of how to cast, like doing the like bow and arrow cast if you want, and then like making a hook set, like landing the fish, and then like you get the choice, like am I going to bring this back and eat this, or am I going to let it go? And I think that like that's a really like rare and special thing that you get in fly fishing and other types of fishing as well. But I think you're presented with a lot of opportunities for like catch and release fishing and fly fishing, especially how states manage a lot of their fisheries. Like there's river sections only that are catch and release that like you really can only fish with fly fishing and fly fishing catch and release. And it's like those are great opportunities, as you said, for training and learning. And I think it really provides confidence for people getting on their journey to like connect with the outdoors in a more meaningful way. And I think it's an amazing place. Like I've had a bunch of mentees who have like started fly fishing and then like eventually started hunting through like some of the other like hunting orgs that I'm involved with, and it's like been really cool to see their journey in that capacity too.
No, that's great. Yeah, I agree with you. Well, let's talk a little about let's dive into some of the basics here. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about it. So as far as thinking through some essential gear, obviously we've mentioned rods and reels and flies. I think that's kind of where we should start. So can you give us like an overview of like basic gear required and then kind of tips on selecting the right stuff?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, I'd say I'd be remiss probably to not say that anyone who's interested in fly fishing should listen to this. There's a podcast series. His name is Tom Rosenbauer. Everyone in like the fly fishing world kind of knows who he is. He's like the Orvis chief enthusiast, quote unquote. But basically, he's like the fly fishing guy who also is really like a fly fishing educator. And I think that's one of the things is he has an amazing podcast called, it used to be the Orvis Fly Fishing Guide podcast. But it's really just like, I think there are, I don't know, hundreds of episodes. And if you go from episode 1 and you go now to episode whatever, 300, 400, whatever it is, you'll hear and learn so much. I've listened to like every episode. I feel like that was integral to my learning because it just like starts from the basics of like, what is fly fishing? Why do we use flies? And so that's a great place to start. And I'll try to consolidate that. But I think that's like definitely been like a great repository of knowledge. And I think a lot of people find that and like they just like love that podcast because it's all information. But to get back to your original question, so I would say everything with fly fishing kind of starts, instead of being like, what rod do I want to use? It actually starts with a fish and like, what am I trying to catch? And so like, let's say that you are, and I'll kind of give like a couple of general buckets. So like, let's say you're thinking trout, right? Something that's like going to be, maybe you're in a place with cold streams, a place with, maybe some mountain streams, maybe some like freestone streams, maybe some tailwaters. And you're in a place where, there are trout in the river and you want to go trout fly fishing. And let's say that, to widen that niche a little bit more, let's say it's not just trout, but let's say it's trout fish that are about the same size as trout. So like we can lump in like largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, you're on a river or something that might have like fish that are around that same size of like maybe you catch an average fish that's at 10 to 12 inches. Big one might be like maybe 20, 24 max. Or so that's like the middle tier bucket of like mid-sized fish. Then let's say you have like small fish, so like panfish, bluegill, crappie, brook trout. So you're in like a small mountain stream or something. That's going to be like our small end of the category. And then let's say that you're doing saltwater, so you're fishing for like striped bass or bluefish or tarpon or permit or something else that's much larger, salmon like steelhead, larger fish, basically anything over like 20, 25 inches. Those are sort of the three tiers of like how you're going to think about rods, because basically in the sort of fly fishing world, all the rod, like the strength of the rods, is based off a classification called weights. And so for a trout or sort of a fish in that medium class weight, you're going to select basically a 5 weight. That's sort of the standard, most commonly used fly fishing rod. And that's because you can handle a fish that is obviously smaller than a fish that, like, one of the small fish, all the way down to like those 2-3 inch brook trout or whatnot. But you could also take a fish that's like, pushing that 20, 24, 25, even 26 inch mark. But the real sweet spot is going to be around that, like anything between 10 to like 20, 25. And that's really based off of the strength of the rod. And so then let's say you're going for bigger fish. Then you're going to want basically, I'm going to give 3 suggestions on rods. All of these things are so nuanced that like we could talk on each category for like ever. But basically, you're going to have 5 weight, you're going to have an 8 weight, and then you're going to have maybe a 2 weight. And so those main categories. A 2 weight's for small fish, a 5 weight's for medium-sized fish, and an 8 weight is for either big fish or big flies. And so basically, that's how I would start selecting rods. Like I think if you're in a place where you're going to be targeting medium-sized fish, go with a 5 weight. It's going to cast nicer. I think also the benefit, like the sort of lower weight rods are going to have a lot more flex, and so they're going to be a lot more fun to catch a fish on, especially if it's a smaller fish. That's the benefit, because most people think, well, why don't I just get an 8 weight if I'm just going to, and I can cover everything. That's a good option, but like you're not going to be able to be as delicate as you might if you're fishing like a 2 weight for like the smaller streams if you have an 8 weight. And so that's the trade-offs. But I think generally speaking, if you want to get like 3 rods to sit set up, do a 5, an 8, and a 2. If you want 1 rod, get a 5 weight. I think that's the most like universal fly rod, and you can basically catch everything on it. And it might take you more time to catch a bigger fish, but you can do it. You just got to let them like run and release your drag a little bit, and you can definitely handle all the small fish. And so the reason that those classifications of the rods are called weights is because they're actually based on the weight classification system is actually talking about the weight of the line. And that's confusing because it's like, oh, what the heck? We're talking about rods. Why are we talking about the lines now? But basically, the weight is actually literally the mass of the line of like the first like 40 feet or approximately the first 40 feet of the line is essentially like a standard-ish measurement that will tell you, okay, this line can cast this weight of rod, which roughly correlates to this size of a fly. All of that to say, you can basically cast any fly on any weight rod. It's just going to be easy or difficult. And so you want to try to match your tool up. And so if you're going to cast for medium fish and using medium flies or small flies, get a 5 weight. If you're going to cast big fish, big flies, get an 8 weight. And if you're going to small fish, small flies, get a 2, 3 weight. So that's like the basic breakdown of rods and selections. And I think within that, like there's a lot of nuance of like how you how you like to fish. Like if you want to fish like a little more aggressive style, like with like these things called streamers that are representing like bait fish and minnows and like crayfish and things of that nature, it's going to be like a lot more like stripping the line, like using the rod to like manipulate the fly, versus if you're casting dry flies, you really want like a very still, what they call drag-free drift, where you just cast the fly gently and let it drift at the exact speed of the current. And so that you might want a more delicate rod with a more delicate presentation. So depending on how you want to do it, you can sort of pick and choose your rod. But I think a great place to start is a 5 weight. And then I think, I'll let you take it over there for more questions, deep dive. But that's the general classification. It's 2, 5, 8.
2, 5, 8. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I think, kind of landing somewhere in the middle. That's what I did. I only have 1 rod. And I was thinking through it. I was like, man, I probably need to check my rod because I don't know the last time I looked at it to make sure it's still functional as far as the rod and the reel. So reels, any nuances? I know for like bigger fish, bigger reels, typically it.
Yeah. That's exactly it, and it's really based off the line size again. So like all the reels are going to be like, oh, this is like a 9-weight reel, so a big reel, versus like a 5-weight reel, which is slightly in the middle, versus a 2-weight, which is the smallest, and that's based off, just the ability to hold line and also the drag. So you're going to have a better drag generally in like a heavier weight rod because if you're fishing in the salt, you want to have a good drag because you're going to be using a lot more. Or if you're fishing for carp, versus like if you're fishing for brook trout, you don't really ever need a drag. You can just pull the line in and the fish. But yeah, so you just match the line up, where you match the line and the rod and the reel together. That's pretty much it. So if you get a small 2-weight rod, you're going to get a 2-weight line and a 2-weight reel. And this can all change in time. But that's the basics. Match everything up: small, medium, large.
Well, I think too, one thing I've always sort of done is that I go to wherever I'm going, like if they've got it, like a local fly shop, and then kind of go in and pick people's brains, see like, hey, this is what I've got, what should we be doing, this is where I'm going, what are you thinking? Kind of just have that conversation, and I would say 99% of the time. I would say actually 95% of the time I've gotten good help from that. There's been a couple occasions that I haven't, but those have been few and far between. But I think it's good, like ask questions. There's a lot of resources online as well too, like forums, Facebook, all that stuff that people, you've got questions there. As far as let's go in the big one. And I know this is probably like the broadest selection when we talk about flies. First off, what are we talking about? Second off, there's so much.
Yeah, there is. I'm like, for people listening, I have my hands on my face. I'm like, oh no, flies. But I think before we even go into flies, honestly, man, because I went through this phase too, where like, oh, the fly is so important, and I think a lot of people do, and like it is obviously like it's like people like have like their entire livelihoods based off of like their specific fly patterns and like major like fly tires. So it is important. But I think presentation will always catch you more fish than the right fly. I will die on that hill. Presentation will catch you more fish than the right fly. And so what I mean by that is like, figuring out how the fish is eating and like what it's eating roughly, but how it's eating is going to like generally allow you to present your fly in a way that the fish is used to seeing some sort of food, and you're going to be more likely to catch a fish. Presentation catches more fish than flies. And so I think, and this is just my perspective, right, one of many that are out there in the fly fishing world, there are a lot of right flies. There are a lot of great flies. There are a lot of okay flies that work and outshine all the best flies in the right conditions. So like I try to keep it pretty minimalist, and like I generally, while I like the sort of like nerding out on bugs and all the things and the hatches, and we can talk about the hatches and stuff later. I like that, but I also try to keep it like pretty simple, so that way I can really focus on like getting good presentations and like meeting the fish where they're at, and like making sure that I'm not giving the fish a reason to not eat my fly. So like I'm not like giving like a bad cast or splashing the fish with my fly line, or like putting a bug that's like a fly that's like 5 sizes too big than the ones that I'm seeing that are like way small. So like basically I would sort of bucket and think about flies as like I'm trying to think about what would be most helpful for people who are like all over the gamut fishing for all different fish species. So maybe I'll just go through kind of rapid fire like a couple of the big fish species and like my top 3 flies and why, because I think that would be helpful, because I think again like it's tying it always into presentation. Trouting with trout, and this is like all trout species, I'd say top one like nymph number 1 is what they call a Waltzworm. It's basically just a small sort of bead-headed nymph, meaning they have a little bit of head that has like a tungsten bead on it, and it's very sparsely tied, and it's skinny, but it has a very buggy body, and it looks like anything from like a caddis pupa, looks like maybe like a mayfly nymph. It could look like a Dobsonfly nymph. It could look like 5 different insects. It's impressionistic rather than sort of like realistic or like representative. It's impressionistic of like a class of insects or a broad insect that is in the right size. And so my box will literally be riddled with like 3 rows of that same fly in like different sizes. And it's really more because like oftentimes I know that if I get the right presentation and I get a refusal, it's probably that maybe my size is slightly off if my presentation was fully right. So anyway, so like a Waltzworm, like a Waltzworm is like what the fly is called, or a sexy waltz. The next one is a pheasant's tail. It's a super simple nymph as well. And then I also really fish a lot of like leeches, and that's like a really common like trout fly. So like in the trout world, like Waltzworm, pheasant's tail, leeches, You can catch fish all over the country, all over the world with those 3 flies. And on the surface, I think you get by with a caddis fly, like a standard. I really like Gary LaFontaine's like sparkle caddis for people who are like really nerding out on that. But like a caddis fly in like 3 different sizes and in 2 or 3 colors. And then like you could also go and make the argument for like, I don't know, like an Adams dry fly. Parachute Adams is like a classic. Mm-hmm. But like, I just want people to like simplify, because I think fly fishing gets really complicated when you start talking about all the flies and all the things. Basically, you're just trying to represent like, is my fish eating something on the surface, or is eating something under the water, under the surface? And if it's eating below the surface, I will generally start and flip over a rock and say, okay, what are these nymphs here? And yes, sometimes you can know the names, but you don't have to. You can just start matching shapes and general sizes, and impressionistic flies will cover all of that. And so like, is it dark or is it light? Is it bigger than a size 10, or is it smaller? Start there, fish it, make sure you have good presentations. If you get fish, great, keep that fly on. If you don't get fish, change your fly. Maybe say, okay, maybe that's the right size, because I looked at the rock and I saw these are the right colors. I saw this was approximately the size, but I started with a big one. Maybe I'll go really small and see, catching fish immediately. So I know it was the size that was my issue. I move over to a different area, maybe that changes, and maybe then I make a change. And so I think really just thinking about it in terms of like what the fish are eating. So like if you're seeing a bunch of fish rising on the surface, if you can't see the insects flying around, it's going to be small. So you should just start with something small if you're going to throw like a dry fly. Like a midge is a good sort of representative small pattern for like a number of insects that are very tiny. And so that's like the trout world, which I feel like fly fishing, specifically with flies, trout is really like the bulk of where flies really matter that much. For the rest of the fish species, I'm going to give you like 3 flies that are like, you can catch fish anywhere in the world, like with these flies. And like, I think with trout, it's hard to give that list because there are specificities to like insects, subspecies, and also like time of the year and like what type of fish you're trying to catch. Like maybe you're trying to catch just like suckers that like maybe insects aren't that important and you just want to like throw like mop or worm looking flies because that's like kind of what they're used to eating on like instinct and reaction. So we go deeper into that, but I think really just think about it as like, okay, if you want to have like 5 flies in your box for trout, you need to have some pheasant tails, some sexy waltz or waltzworms, some leeches, and then in terms of your dry flies for like the other 2, I would probably go with a caddis fly, a couple of caddis flies, and then some sort of like blue wing olive or like parachute Adam flies. Those are like 5 flies that you need to catch fish anywhere, and then the rest of that is presentation for trout. Moving on, because that's like, I said I'd give 3, and that was 5, but that's only trout. I'm going to stick to 3 for everything else, max. I might even go less than that on some fish. Like I'm a carp guide, and so, right, like I fish, like I'll fish 3 or 4 days a week, like catching carp. And I think that like carp are interesting because they do actually have like a lot of variability in terms of like what they eat based off where they're living, sort of similar to trout. But I would say generally most places don't really have like a dry fly carp scene unless you're in like a place like where I'm at or other park systems where like the fish are inherently used to looking up, or like with mulberries, or if they have like mulberries. But I think for carp, the sort of base flies that you would use is some sort of damselfly nymph. So like a small sort of very like impressionistic damselfly nymph, a sort of like bead chain eyed leech, or like a carp fly. They're generally called carp flies. It's basically just a bead chain eye leech, and then some sort of like squirmy wormy with a bead chain eye on it. You can generally catch carp in any water with those 3 variations of fish or flies. So some sort of damsel replicative fly, some sort of bead chain eye carp fly, which is basically just like a leech pattern with a heavy weighted bead chain. So it rides upside down since carp are bottom feeders. So like your fly will be sort of undulating in the water with the weight here and the hook point sort of sticking up like this. And the carp will come by and pick it up and grab it, and it won't get stuck because it's not riding on the bottom. And then, what was my last one that I said? And then like some sort of squirmy worm variation for carp. Bass, like smallmouth and largemouth, there's some variability here, and people will like go all day on talking about like what type of streamer, what colors, and like you have to have flash and mint and all the other, like all this other. You need streamers basically, like poppers and streamers for bass. If they're eating on the surface, throw some poppers. I really like spiders as well, but poppers, spiders, and streamers for bass. Streamers could be anything from like very large, like 4 to 5 to 6 inch, like bait fish replicative patterns, to like super small, like woolly buggers that are like half an inch in black, to like leeches or like hellgrammites, like mimicking patterns. But generally, like a woolly bugger will catch any bass. So like you want to get a woolly bugger, you want to get maybe, man, that is tough when I start thinking about it because there's a lot of variation. sometimes you really want the specificity. Like my bass flies, I throw a lot of crawfish bass flies, and so I personally would always throw crawfish bass fly. So like some sort of crawfish imitation, a woolly bugger, and then for a popper, I would generally prefer a spider over a popper, but I like poppers too. But I like spiders, and I think that they're a little more replicative and also like a little more subtle, and fish eat them regularly. For the dry fly, for my 3 flies for bass, both small and largemouth. Bluegill, really, like you can do small poppers, any nymph, any small nymph, like any small nymph. There's not that much specificity, I think. And then I'm trying to think what else is like a more popular game fish that people are targeting. I said bass, trout, carp, and then panfish. I guess saltwater.
Yeah, I was gonna say saltwater, like redfish or.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, redfish. So I guess honestly, I'll just classify all saltwater like together. Clouser minnows, like different sizes of clouser minnows, which are basically just like heavily weighted bait fish imitations that can also look like bait fish or eels. You can cut them really short and make them look like small shrimp. You can like bundle them up and add little bodies that make them look like crustaceans. Clouser minnows, I'd say. And if you want something on the surface, it's called gurglers. They're like a sort of popper foam fly that like rides on the surface and makes wake and eats on the top. But really, clouser minnows. If you want to just fish saltwater, go with clouser minnows. And so, yeah, clouser minnows for salt. Honestly, Waltzworm or pheasant tail for trout. Just flat out. You can do dry fly things if you want, and then you can throw a caddisfly if you want in there. Smallmouth and largemouth bass. Throw a crawfish streamer. Panfish, bluegill. Throw some sort of like small nymphs. Carp. You're going to throw basically either. Honestly, yeah, you're going to throw a bee chain eye, like carp fly, which is like a leech with bee chain eye, or some sort of like worm variation with a bee chain eye. That's like super, like those 5 classes, just like find some flies, type that in, you'll see some pictures. You really can't go wrong. Get some different sizes. But it's hard because, like, again, I said presentation I think is more important than all the flies. And so, like, really, like, trying to figure out, like, how you present your fly is, like, so much more important. And, like, that's something that, like, takes time, but I think after you do it a couple times, you kind of realize, oh, like, it might have rejected my fly, but it probably rejected something on my presentation.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I have a lot of bad casts, a lot of bad presentations, so probably not the best. It's probably me.
Sorry, Justin. Sorry. I'm not trying to. But look at that. You don't have to worry about flies. You don't have to worry about flies now, right?
Seen one. You just got to do it. Just do it.
Bro, literally, there's a story of a guy who, like, I think it was, like, somewhere in Pennsylvania on these spring creeks, and I forget his name, but he pioneered this fly. It's, like, called a sow bug. But basically, someone told him, like, oh, you can't catch a fish on this because he, like, grabbed a little fiber off a carpet and was like, watch me, and, like, literally tied a fly up. It looked like nothing. It looked like absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Just, like, cleaned house on a stream and, like, lost his bet to this guy. And this is this is a real story. I don't know what the origin of it is, but I remember hearing it, and I was like, presentation, 100%. And, like, time and time again, I feel like so many people will endorse that. It's really about how you present the flies. And, like, in every species, it's all about meeting the fish where they're at and eating, and sort of showing them a fly how they want to eat a fly. Because we don't have the benefit of scent, so they have to be able to see it or feel it or, like, be in the presence and know where it is.
No, it's fair. All right, so we've assembled our gear. We now have flies. We've talked about the key presentation being key. Where are we going? Where would we fish at? Just like some general. I mean, we don't have to get specific. What obviously, a lot of state agencies have great resources. We talk about there's like trout routes. There's other access maps, Onyx, all those that kind of show where. But if I was just a general person, where would I find places to fish?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think access is a huge one because, like, right, so many people don't want to be like trespassing or something, or like, be like in confrontations about like, you're on my spot. And so I think like the first thing that I would do when you're trying to start fly fishing is literally, as you said, just get on like your state department's website and type in your state fly fishing, like game and fish or commission or like, environmental conservation or whatever the sort of, if it's wildlife, game and fish or Department of Environmental Conservation, whatever your state's hunting and fishing regulatory agent is, type that, your state fly fishing, and it's going to send you essentially to a list of places that are either classified as like designated fly fishing only streams or like places that people will go to fly fish. And oftentimes they have these interactive maps. And so like that's a great place to start. And I use those often. They're like basically encoded into GIS to say, oh, okay, let's look near me on the map. And also then click this stream that's highlighted. And it'll tell you like, here are the regulations. Here's the season. Here's what the gear requirements are in terms of like, maybe you can only use one fly and it has to be barbless. Excuse me. So that's a great place to start. I think even better than that is like, I'm a huge fan of just like having community, and I think like within the outdoors, I think the outdoor community is such an important space and place. And so like if you've got a local fly shop near you, as you said, like 95% of the time, people are going to be cool in the shop. And so I think just like go buy some flies, support the shop, and like chat with them. Basically, say like, hey, like here's where I'm at. I'm like new. I'm interested, trying to get into this. Like, what would you recommend? And like they're going to have local information wherever you are on the resource. And also like give you some intel of like good places where to start, like places where they know that like, oh yeah, people can go and catch fish there. They're not going to send you anywhere wrong because right, it's their reputation too. They want to make sure that you have a good experience visiting their water, or maybe it's like new to you home water. So I think talking to fly shops is great. I also think like supporting local guides is excellent, and I think that's going to be a really fast way to like onboard your learning process in a much more rapid way, because not only are you going to like obviously catch some fish, which is like everyone wants to catch fish, right? No one goes on a fishing trip not trying to catch fish, but you're going to learn so much about like how to read the water, like why you're going to fish there, how you should present that fly, like what fly to choose, and also like what bodies of water and what sections on that body of water like the guide's going to. And like a good guide is going to like explain all of that to you in as much or as little detail as you want. And so I think like a guide is like it's invaluable to like your experience.
I think about like the guide aspect, and a lot of people, there's a lot of folks that are diehard DIYers. Like I want to go there, I want to figure it out, I want to learn it, and it's cool. Place for that. Place for guides. I've done both with good results and mixed results either way, and I think. The communication is key too with guides, setting kind of what you want out of the experience from the beginning, having that conversation. And oh my gosh, there's something else in my mind that was going to. Oh, I think about it like from a professional standpoint. Like I immerse myself in my job. I'm very focused on it. I'm always looking to kind of sharpen my edge and be better, be stronger, be whatever, wittier, funnier. I don't know. I look at the same way as a guide too. Like a guide, that's their job, that's their profession. So you have to have a little bit of faith and trust from the get-go that person is there to like do the best they can. And they continue like seeking, how do I get better? How do I, improve? Where do I find better spots? I, find better techniques, and my job as a guide would be to share those with people. Right. So I think about that too. And I think, there's been a lot of articles written about it too, like how to kind of interact with guides and stuff like that. I think those are helpful if you're coming into new and you're interested in getting a guide. I mean, give it a quick read. I don't know. What's your perspective as a guide to fishing with people? Like what's that like?
I mean, honestly, I think some of my like favorite trips and clients are people who like kind of like know kind of what they want out of the experience. As you said, I think it's really fun to be able to like, tailor an experience for people. And if it's like, okay, like, hey, I just really want to catch a lot of fish and I want to have a lot, like maximum opportunities, a lot of fish. I don't really care that much about learning techniques or like seeing new water or whatever. And it's like, okay, cool. Like that saves me some time, because instead of like doing a whole deal of like, oh, and here's all the history and everything, it's like, no, we're just going to like be on fish. But versus some other people who like really want to see it all and like experience the holistic sort of like, learning points that you have at like every piece of water that you might fish or expose them to. And I think that like, then there are other people who like want like, very technical like instruction on like, oh, like I want to improve this part of my cast and like this piece of like my fly fishing game. And so I think that like communication up front from like what like the client wants, I think is like, I absolutely love that. And like it makes for really just like just a fun time, because it's like I get to sort of then like have some insight of like what you like. And even if people aren't upfront about it at the beginning, it's like always how I start my trips. I'm like, hey, so like, what do you want this day to look like? Like, do you want to? Here's how I generally structure trips, and I can tailor this. You know what I mean? So like, whatever it is that you want to do, we can make that happen. So that way, it's like, I always sort of think about like every trip is like an opportunity for people to learn. So even if people just want to come and catch fish with me, they're going to learn something, whether it's like how to fight a huge fish or set the hook or whatever. Like, I want people to learn, because that's how you can carry it with you, right? And even if it's just like, you never do it again, like fish that type of water again, it's like in the back of your mind in case you need to like draw on that experience in your next fishing like outing or something. And so I think like people who sort of have an idea of what they want to learn, or at least open to learning, I think is a big part as a guide. And everyone who I've worked with who has that perspective has just been a joy to guide. And I think most clients, all my clients have been great, and like I've really like enjoyed that aspect of like sharing and like helping that educational journey for people. So I think just like go with an open mind and like communicate with your guide what you want, and like be ready to learn. I think that like there's a lot of things that like guides do and learn over the time of just spending time on water. It might not make sense in the moment, and like it might feel frantic when they're like, just cast. I know there's no fish there, just cast there. And it's like they've seen something that you maybe haven't seen yet, and like you don't like have the eyes to see yet, because it's like this is your first time looking at this water, but it's like they've been looking at this for like years. And so it's like just like giving that trust, as you said, I think is really important too. So I think those are the big things. But I think similarly, like it's up to the guide too to like build that environment where like the client can feel like, oh, like I don't like see what we're doing, or I'm confused about it, so they can like let you know if like they do feel like they're like lost somewhere in that, because otherwise like it feels like you're not working on the same team. And so I think like both for clients and guides, just like communication and like being willing to like learn. Like I learn all the time too from my clients. So I'm like, oh, this like teaching this technique this way is like more effective than this way. Like I learn all the time from like my clients, which I think is also important.
Friends of NRA is your chance to support our Second Amendment rights and preserve America's hunting traditions. Join Friends of NRA at one of our 600 exciting events nationwide. From games to auctions and exclusive firearms, Friends of NRA events are your chance to support a cause you care about while having a great time with patriots in your community. Whether you're a seasoned shooter, an avid hunter or outdoorsman, or passionate about freedom, there's a place for you within Friends of NRA. Visit friendsofnra.org to find an event near you. Stand up for freedom with the Friends of NRA.
If you hunt enough, you learn the truth. What you seek speaks a language and knows it well. That's why every Primo's call for everything you hunt is made the right way. We sweat every detail so you get more out of every hunt, and nothing leaves our hand until we know it'll work in yours. Because we don't just make the world's best calls, we speak the language. Primos.
All right, let's we're running up on time. We've ran over, but I think that's okay. As long as you're good, I'm good.
I'm good.
All right, cool. So through our progression here, we've talked about gear, we've talked about kind of how to find it. Now let's say we've gone out and we've fished, and now we have caught fish. Because of the excellent anglers we are, or we're going to become. Let's talk about some cooking of fish. I guess first off, what's one of your favorite species to go out and target on the fly? And I know this touches a little on our last episode we did, but just kind of broad, salt, fresh, whatever.
I think to eat. I mean, honestly, I don't saltwater fly fish enough to catch enough saltwater fish, but saltwater fish are the best tasting fish, hands down. Mm-hmm. However, the fish that I catch on the fly are usually like the fish that I catch and keep a lot are trout. And like particularly, I like certain states' strains of stock trout because they use like a higher pellet ratio with like krill and like crustaceans in it. So the flesh is orange and fatty like salmon on a rainbow trout. So it's like a stock trout that looks literally like a salmon and tastes like buttery like a salmon. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I'll eat those stalkers every day. And certain states use it like a little bit more, like New York State and like and Rhode Island have like pretty high like shrimp protein inside of their pellets, and so their stalkers are like buttery and orange. And like honestly, trout are like probably one of my like most commonly kept like fly fishing fish. And like They're versatile. I love them. They're delicious.
What's your favorite thing to do with them?
I actually
Cool.
have this dish that I am actually going to write up for.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm going to write up and have actually submitted. I'm delayed. It should have been here today, but it's going to be submitted and hopefully posted by September. But basically, it is like a Chinese steamed fish. And so this is actually like my roommate, so one of my best friends. Like we moved to the city and have been here for 7 years together. Basically, he would like have this like double boiler setup on this like triple. He had like a double boiler setup on the stove one time that I came in, and it was just like so aromatic. And it was like I was like, oh my god, what is going on? Like it smells so good in here. It was like spicy, yet sort of like savory and a little sweet, and like had a little like sort of like sourness to it. And I was like, what is that amazing smell? And like it was just basically like a double boiler, right? So he had just water with like another pan that was sort of uplifted off of it, steaming herbs. So he chopped ginger, garlic, scallion, like a little bit of fish sauce, and then like finished it up with some like Chinese like wine in this like broth that was just steaming and sort of percolating and building up and sort of like sort of extracting all of those oils in like a broth that was being double boiled. And then what he did was basically put the fish in there and steamed that. And then after he sort of did that like quick steam until like the sort of fish was like kind of flaky, this was like a rainbow trout that he'd purchased, and like basically did the steam and then transferred it to a plate. And then what he did is actually take some of those herbs and like basically pour it off, cook down the water like in a separate pan, cook off the water, add oil, and then sort of like a hot chili paste, and then basically cook that down until it was like sizzling hot, like cooking, really like almost about to smoke, and then pour it over top the fish. And man, I was like, shit, yeah, this is incredible. And yeah, so basically like I really like co-opted that recipe, and like it was something that I just fell in love with because it's such a great way to like use so many flavors of just a variety of herbs. And like I've actually used it with like an amalgam of herbs, not just like sort of more like traditional Chinese spices and like ginger, garlic, the scallion, but like I'll use essentially like oregano, thyme. So I'll do like Italian variations of that same dish where like I'll also pack the body cavity with like lemons and also like a little bit of thyme and like oregano as well. And so like after you do sort of that initial steam with like white wine and you cook the fish and you're sort of reducing that, you add a little piece of butter and sort of like get like a little glaze going on with your herbs, and then sort of do that and pour over the top. And like that was all based off of that original like Chinese steamed fish dish. And like yeah, it's absolutely one of my go-tos because it's like really pretty too. You get to present a whole fish. It's a great meal for like a couple of people. You serve it with like rice to the side and some sort of like steamed vegetable or like a stir-fried veggie. It's just a really wonderful way to like have a trout, and it's like kind of nice because everyone, you know, you go and you catch 2 trout and you're like, wow, this is awesome. This is like a meal for like me and a couple of people, especially if it's like a decently sized stocker. And I absolutely just love like how it looks. I love being able to eat it off the bone. It's like there's no fish wasted too. Like it's not like a fillet where you have like wasted bits of meat in between. And also like it debones pretty quickly because of this because of the steaming. You can actually just like literally rip most of like grab the tail, and it usually just falls right off the bone. And then you have the sauce that's all around it. You kind of just like bathe that in, and it's like so good.
Yes,
yeah, so that's a go-to for me.
Tasty. Actually, I
How about
have
you?
a couple.
What's like your?
I have a couple, as you can imagine. I did one the other night. We had some trout fillets. They were actually like I can't remember, butterflied, reverse butterflied, whatever it is. So like the full fillet with skin. That is my new preferred way to fillet fish. If I'm going to fillet fish, that is it.
I need to learn how to do that, and I need to try it. How is it?
It takes a little bit of practice to get down, but you just got to do it. And you got to come to the realization, like, you're probably going to mess it up, and then there's going to be bones, but you just kind of eat around it. I've had to train my children that, like, real food comes with bones, period, and just, like, don't give me the, ooh, there's a bone. Like, yes, it's going to have a bone. Just pick it out and keep going.
That's awesome.
So I did this recipe the other day, and really the highlight was the fish itself, very straightforward and simple. I just did super high heat probably I was using avocado oil, so I was smoking. It was smoking, so at least 450 in my pan. Dropped the fillet in skin side down, just let it sear till it was like crackling, and then I seasoned the top with like this Singapore curry blend. I don't know, my wife had bought it somewhere and just covered in that. And then when I flipped it over, I just let it sear long enough on the flesh side to like get a nice brown crisp, and then pulled it off and just stuck it on a plate. The sauce is the star of the show, and it's a ginger shallot sauce. So
Yes.
2 tablespoons minced ginger, 3 shallots, we'll say green onions. I think I did 3 green onions and 1 shallot. Soy sauce, rice vinegar, sesame oil, and I think a little bit of I did rice vinegar and maybe a little bit of lime juice, and just mixed all that together. And oh my gosh! And right over the top of the fillets, it was like magical. So
Man. That's making me so hungry. I have trout in my freezer that I need to clean out actually, because I'm like, it's time to start keeping fish again. So
yep. Well,
I'm gonna
there
have
you
to look
go.
for that one. Do you have that written up? I have to look for that one.
I do. I can send it to you. I haven't published it or anything yet, but I can. I may have to do that now after this. I don't think I have any pictures of it. I'll have to remake it. Trout. So another one. I made this one a while ago. This is I think a pandemic meal. This was 2020. Trout in parchment with Thai basil. We had an overabundance of Thai basil in our garden, and I was trying to figure out things to do with it, and I landed on this. Essentially, like it did it in parchment, so like en papiers, like the French method. Essentially, you put it all in there with everything. You seal it up, and you like. I'm trying to think if I steamed it or. So it was Thai basil, carrots, chives, lime juice, soy sauce, fish sauce, and then your fish. You could do it with salmon too if you really had. What did I do? You wrap all the fish in wrapped fish fillets in the baking sheet. You put it in the oven at 350 for about 15 to 20 minutes. Super simple. Pull it out, and I served it. Atop noodles, which I thought was really
yum.
good. Just like rice noodles.
Yeah,
it was super good. And then awesome. I put the grated carrots and chives and lime juice and stuff on top of it, combined with like an oil. Oh, it was good. Super tasty.
That's awesome.
And then one recipe I dream about. So I was in Ireland in 2012, and we went to this restaurant there. I still remember the name of it, Fade Street Social. I don't know if it's still there. It's on Fade Street in Dublin, or was. But they did everything like in the pizza oven, and outside like Italy, this was one of the, I think we'll say like the emergence of that big open fire cooking pizza method back then. So they made a ton of dishes in there, and one that they made was this like a pan fried rainbow trout with smoked butter and tomato sauce. And I like worked to replicate this tomato sauce to the best of my memory for a long time, and I think I finally published recipe in like 2015, so it was like 3 years later that I kind of figured it. But so your smoked butter.
What's the smoked butter?
Butter.
Talk to me about this sauce, man.
Where's my smoked butter? I talked about it. Okay.
Where's my smoked butter?
Yeah, where's
the captions?
Yeah. So you can't just put butter in a smoker, obviously. You can smoke butter next time you're using the smoker, but you must funnel some of the smoke from the smokestack into a sealable container and allow the butter to sit in the container in your refrigerator until it seems smoky enough. There's all kinds of mechanisms nowadays you can like inject with little hoses and smokers in there, but you need the butter in a sealed container. You can cold smoke it as well, but you need the butter to set for at least about 2 hours in smoke to kind of get that smoke flavor. So the most challenging part, and I referenced this in the article, is like channeling the smoke into a container, as you could imagine. But there's devices out there. Like if you really want to get into it, you could probably do it pretty easy. But yeah, the smoked butter. So the sauce itself, smoked butter, tomato sauce, and garlic. That's it. Super simple, super straightforward. Pan-sear this is like the perfect camping. I think camping or like waterside recipe, because literally all you would need is a cast iron pan. You sear your fish off. You throw your butter in the pan, mix in the same pan, mix it with the tomato sauce and your garlic and all that, and kind of let it go. And then just pour it over the top of the fillet or the fish if you want to do a whole fish as well.
I'm gonna make this when we're going camping next week. That sounds delicious.
Yeah, no, it's pretty phenomenal. Very straightforward, very good. But yeah, that I dreamt, and I'm sure I missed steps from what I had in Ireland, but it's still like the recipe lives rent free in my brain. That's
awesome.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, the thing I think about like freshwater fish, like we've now, I think you're probably one of the last folks we're gonna have on the show to talk about sort of like our summer fish series, where we've talked about all this. And one, I've learned like a ton, but two, like freshwater fish in general are just awesome. I think if you're going to come out of the gate and you want to like get familiar in the outdoor space, like fishing is where to start. It's super easy. It's approachable. You can generally do it anywhere. And you can generally eat the majority of species of fish pretty easily. And if all else fails, fry it. Like,
yeah, seriously. or curry. Yeah, I've had carp before. Carp curry. I actually really love the carp. It's like a really light white fish. I don't keep any carp, obviously, in Central Park, but from other places, it's a great fish.
There's a lot. I don't know. Any other thoughts on food? If not, we'll wrap up and give some last thoughts, and we'll close out here.
One quick recipe that I want to bring up is it's actually my favorite overall fish recipe, which is it's a salad actually. So we have bluefish here, which are sort of all over the Atlantic seaboard. And I think honestly they might have bluefish on California too, but really the Atlantic fishery of bluefish, and they're very oily. They're sort of like in the sardine herring family, but much larger. Like you can get a bluefish up to like 40 pounds. But basically they're prolific, especially in the summer times, and a lot of people catch them as byproduct with catching for striped bass. And usually smoked bluefish is the main way that people keep them. And so what I like to do is smoke them. And the same thing I'll do with trout as well. And then take like a food processor, or even if I don't have a food processor at the time and I just want to get like a sort of cruder version, take smoked bluefish. I'll just do a light saltwater sugar brine, smoke it, and then basically dice that up, throw it into a food processor with garlic, a lot of olive oil, Parmesan cheese. I will then throw like a little oregano, some thyme, lots of black pepper. And basically make like a super, super fresh like Caesar salad, but using the bluefish umami instead of adding anchovies. And it's a bluefish Caesar. And it is absolutely to die for. You finish it with lemon, and it is just like hands down one of the best fish uses I've ever found. Like there's a restaurant actually in Providence, Rhode Island, that is just, it's, my gosh, it's like they do this bluefish salad. It's a pizza place called Pizza Marvin, but they have a bluefish smoked salad. And like I like literally every time I make smoked bluefish salad, I think about theirs, and I'm like, I got to try to get as close to that one as I can get. And it's so freaking good, and it's really just like a great way to use like a fish that usually most people discard, but also it's a great way to mix up your trout game too, because you can keep and smoke a bunch of trout and have that for storage later. And frozen smoked trout lives forever.
Yeah.
So last thing on food.
That's a very key thing. I think the smoking as well, like preservation. You can smoke any fish, and it'll keep. There's tons of versatility with smoked fish, but holy smokes! All right, well, let's close this out here. Last thoughts, Brandon. Just kind of in general, anything you want to leave me or the listeners with as we close out intro to fly fishing.
Fly fishing is great, as you've probably heard. I love it. I think a lot of other people love it. I think a lot of people should love it. I always start my like talks when I'm like talking about like guiding in the park, whatever. One of my first slides is why fish for carp on the fly, and my next slide is because it's fun. And I think that's generally the case with all fly fishing. It's just a lot of fun. And so if you fish for anything else, you're likely going to really enjoy fly fishing, because there are so many different just like things you have to learn, and also rewards that I think that you get that you don't get in other fishing. And so I would just highly recommend everyone try it. There are a lot of great organizations that are out there to teach people how to fly fish as well, which I'd be happy to like plug and sort of give my information later. Or if now's the time to let me know, I can throw that in now. But
go for it.
Well, yeah, so I mean, I work with a bunch of different groups as like volunteer. So for Hunters of Color, we do a lot of like fishing intro clinics. Backcountry hunters and anglers, we do a lot of sort of education and like archery work for like hunting and fishing access and and mentorship programming here in New York. And then Brown Folks Fishing is another great org to get involved with. Orvis, the company at large, does great education work. I think everyone should go check out the Orvis Fly Fishing Learning Center. It's online, it's free totally, and you can literally watch from video 1, which is like why fly fishing, to like video, lesson 40, like I'm fishing for tarpon and like the shells or whatever, and like what do I need to it's like very detailed, very good. Highly recommend that. And then lastly, if you want to connect with me or ever come on a trip with me, I like do guiding basically from like April to September in New York City. For carp, you can find me at BDL13 or on my website at Carp in the Park NYC. And thanks so much, Justin. This was great chatting, learning about the HN fly fishing angle. Happy to talk fly fishing shop with you. It's great to hear your story too, man. That's like, we got to fish together sometime now that you're on the East Coast.
Yep, here I am, just a few hours away now. No, thanks for coming on. I know we had to jump around a couple dates to get this done, but I'm glad we did. I'm glad we had this conversation. I think I think opening folks' minds up to just kind of fly fishing in general, the demystification of it, along with a lot of other things that we try to demystify to include food. But just the approach of getting out and doing it, I think, is the first step, and giving people the knowledge and ability to do that, or at least a jumping off point to begin their own journey, I think is why we're here and why I wanted to do this episode sort of a lot. As I mentioned earlier, this probably is going to close out our fishing focused stuff for the summer here. We're going to switch gears a bit, get into some food episodes. We've got some big guests on the line coming up here throughout the fall that we're trying to have record episodes with us, or we are recording episodes with them. So keep an eye out for that. And once again, thanks everybody for listening. And whatever podcast platform you're listening on, please punch that 5-star button, leave us a review, tell us we're doing right, or, tell us we're doing wrong. Thanks everybody. Have a good night.
A life that has the stories to back it. A life to be proud of. It's a Winchester life.
Yeah, baby. 6'8" Western. Oh, mule deer, baby, right there.
Tune in every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV.
Shoot straight and come hungry, my friends. This is Duck Camp Dinners.
Oh, he mad.
Big things planned with some alligator, some ducks. It's gonna be good, and I'm looking forward to cooking. Don't miss a new episode of Duck Camp Dinners. It's coming at you every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on Waypoint TV.